discussion. So when you look at economic growth, there is a difference between economic growth versus economic growth is of two types. One is what we call actual growth versus potential growth. Potential growth is basically when the GDP is shifting to the right. So if this is my, like PPC, if PPC shift to the right, this is what we call potential growth. Or in other words, LRAS shift to the right, it's called potential growth. Remember from the discussion in the past, potential growth happens when there is a rise in the quality or quantity of factors of production. If the quality of factors of production go up or quantity of factors of production go up, then the LRAS will shift to the right or PPC will shift to the right. So economic growth, which is potential growth, is when the full employment level of output is going up. Make sense? On the other hand, guys, actual growth is when your AD shift to the right. So if this was your AD before, let's say this was your equilibrium point, right? And then AD goes to the right, you go towards full employment. This is basically called actual growth. So a rise in AD, when the AD goes up, causing GDP to go up, that's what we call actual growth. And actual growth will make you go towards the PPC. Okay. But potential growth will shift the PPC to the right. Are you all with me? Does that make sense? So actual growth will make you go towards the PPC, while potential growth will make the PPC shift to the right. So we need to distinguish between actual versus potential growth, because what if I tell you that actual growth is faster than potential growth? Okay. So if actual growth is faster than potential growth, then clearly unemployment will go down, and we might also sometimes find inflation to happen. But if actual growth is slower than potential growth, like if actual growth is not rising quickly and potential growth is rising faster, then there could be possibility. Let me write this. So if actual growth is less than potential growth, okay, AG for actual growth, PG for potential growth, then basically, or rising faster than potential growth, or rate of actual growth is slower than rate of potential growth, then you will see unemployment to go up. Yeah, because you are not, your PPC will shift to the right faster while you're moving from point A to point B. You're going towards the PPC, but the PPC is also shifting to the right. Okay, are you all with me? Does that make sense? A lot of MCQs come about this. So potential growth is a rise in LRAS, but actual growth is the shift of the PPC. What are the advantages of economic growth? So let's look at some of the advantages of economic growth, and let's look at also then some of the disadvantages of economic growth, because economic growth has both pros and cons. Clearly, one of the advantages of economic growth is this, that there will be higher standard of living that happens. Why is that so? Because your AD is rising, your aggregate demand is rising, right? Causing unemployment to go down, which means GDP to go up. And that will mean income levels will go up, which means higher standard of living will happen. And automatically that would mean more people will get goods and services, and that's a big advantage. Secondly, there is what we call fiscal dividend. When the unemployment is going down, government expenditure will go down on unemployment benefits. At the same time, taxes will go up. Your tax revenue will go up. Why would your tax revenue go up? Because a lot of incomes are generated, and basically this would mean T minus G will be greater than zero, or the government will run into what we call a budget surplus because of this. Thirdly, guys, there is what we call an investment accelerator effect. This basically argues this, that because your economic growth is happening, there's a demand rise is happening, and uh, there is more output. Let me write this. So the output is going up, so GDP is going up. So a rise in GDP, or Y to go up, causing more demand, and therefore more investment, which in turn would mean again multiplier effect would happen, which means more income and so on. So there is what we call uh, a growth spiral, because rising GDP rising output can cause investment to go up, which can cause GDP to go up further. So rising demand and output can encourage more investment. That's your accelerator effect, and this can help in sustaining the growth, because in more investment would mean more GDP, and this could become a cyclical effect. Make sense? Similarly, guys, there's going to be more growth and more business confidence when GDP is rising. When you will see a rise in economic growth, uh, or economic growth can result in basically more business confidence to happen in an economy, which is good for the stock market, which is good for the in overall investment, and that's good news for the economy as well. So 4 points to remember: number one, higher living standard, budget surplus; number two, investment accelerator effect; and number four is business confidence. Make sense? Any questions, guys? Any questions before we move on? Okay, moving on. What are the disadvantages of economic growth? Uh, One big disadvantage of economic growth is, guys, that it can cause inflation to happen, because when the AD goes up, right? Remember, this is not potential growth, but this is actual growth. If AD goes up, it will cause price level to go up. So there is big disadvantage is this, that the economic growth can lead to inflation. So there is a trade-off. Of course, when the AD goes up, price level goes up, your GDP will rise, but that also means inflation will happen. So one of the biggest disadvantages of economic growth or actual economic growth is inflation. The second one is basically environment, guys. Whenever there is economic growth happening, there's also an issue that we raise in terms of economic growth can lead to what we call environmental impact. Economic growth, and we saw this in first chapter also. Whenever there is economic growth happening, the GDP is rising. There's also a rise in stress levels. Also a rise in, for example, pollution and noise levels. Road congestions can happen, and there is basically, this is what we call negative effect of economic growth, because the quality of life can go down, and that can basically be a problem. And also, we are using up resources which are what we call non-renewable resources, like oil and all that, or all non-renewable resources which you'll be eating up, and that could also be a problem for the economy. Does that make sense, guys? One of the problems that happens is that there is environmental damages of economic growth. Thirdly, guys, because of economic growth, you'll see some people to get richer, other will basically not do well so soon. So not all of the benefits of economic growth are evenly distributed, and we will see uh, one of the challenges of that happens is this, that if there's a rise in GDP, there's also a rise in income inequality, and the rise in what we call uh, gap between the rich and the poor. Unless we, of course, have very high progressive taxes, we may see the rich to become richer and the poor to not benefit from the overall economic growth of the economy. Make sense? Any questions, guys? Okay, moving on. Then comes your social effect. What are the social effects of your economic growth? We say one of the social effects is just that because of economic growth, people may actually end up pursuing what we call material growth by a country, and this could lead to a more greedy, more selfish, and less caring kind of an environment, where people are only fulfilling what we call their self-interest rather than the interest of the society. You're looking at self-interest, and as the industry becomes more industrialized, it is also seen the that there will be more violence, more crime, more loneliness, and stress-related illnesses because of the quick growth, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that we see in economic growth to happen is just that people become very self-centered. There is less focus on social goals. There's also, because the gap between the rich and the poor is growing, you will see crime and other issues to happen, which could be problematic. Make sense? Any questions, guys? Are we good to move on? Okay, moving on. I'm going to talk about now what are the things that can limit economic growth quickly, and then basically how do we promote more economic growth. Well, so when you have, and I think Pakistan can become a case in point, where like poor infrastructure becomes one of the factors that can basically limit your economic growth and development both. Similarly, lack of human capital or uneducated labor force can become a problem as well. Similarly, your country that relies more on primary product is less likely to see economic growth. At the same time, countries that are looking at, just 1 minute, guys. Sorry, guys. So, guys, what are primary product dependencies? What are the problems that happen in developing countries? It's just that countries like Pakistan and developing countries mainly, they rely on primary products, and that can limit economic development, because when you rely on primary products, you are basically relying on a sector which has volatile prices. Prices can go up and down. Primary products also have low income elasticities. We saw this in AS economics, that the demand is not growing as fast as other sectors, and that is basically going to basically make our GDP values to be lower than other countries. Make sense? Any questions, guys? Uh, Another problem that happens in poor countries, which is basically limit our economic growth and development, is saving gaps. You know, the problem is this, that when the MPC, when your country has a lot of poor people, your MPC for the poor people is high. Isn't that true? And your MPS is low, right? If MPS is low, that would mean savings will be low, right? And that would mean you do not have enough capital available, or you do not have enough savings available for investment. And this is the key factor theories in this Haradoma model, which came up, which says that poor countries are poor because they do not save enough. And the reason why they don't save enough is because, of course, their MPS is low. So there is a saving gap which is causing an economy to suffer. Make sense? Then comes, guys, what we call capital or human flight. What is capital or human flight? Well, if you're a poor country, uh, then of course a lot of people leave the country. So there's countries that have, like for example, Pakistan. You see a lot of you guys try to sort of graduate and go to universities abroad, and may not come back to the country. Also capital, also like financial capital also sometimes is not retained, is invested elsewhere. So countries with a poor reputation may sometimes struggle to attract and retain capital, both human capital and financial capital. And that's a big problem that happens. And next is, of course, corruption, which is also high in developing countries. Debt is also high in developing countries. Political uncertainty is another problem that becomes a serious issue for developing countries. So, developing countries uh, actually suffer from lack of growth because of these reasons. Make sense, guys? So, how do we promote economic growth? Well, number one is foreign aid, which is what Pakistan relies upon, sadly, is one way of basically bridging the saving gap. And it can actually, foreign aid can be of various kinds. It could be in kind, like expertise, or it could be in cash. Both of these could be a way to sort of encourage economic development. Secondly, is debt relief. A lot of countries, poor countries who are in high debt, may ask for debt relief that can actually help in promoting economic growth, because when you do not have to pay that debt, then money can be invested in the country. Third one is basically education, which is development of human capital. That's another important factor. When you are investing in people, it can lead to economic development and growth. Similarly, free market supply side policies basically allow markets to operate more freely. Let there be more privatization, deregulation, reducing power of trade unions, and any unnecessary regulation can be. And I think the name IMF is an important name to understand, because IMF is a key party Pakistan takes a loan from, and IMF has some requirements from Pakistan when it comes to this context. So right now, they are arguing with Pakistan that Pakistan should let the state bank to be completely, independent, because that will allow monetary policy to be completely independent as well. Similarly, another way to promote your economic development could be through your tourism, which is what Pakistan can rely upon. And lastly is industrialization, which is basically moving from agriculture. So from agriculture to your manufacturing sector, which has a better GDP contribution. Makes sense? I'm going to skip role of multinationals. It's easy for you guys to go ahead and read it. So do that. So we were done with this chapter, guys. Uh, this chapter I'll do later, but I'm going to do market uh, sort of. In fact, you know what I can do? Let me do this chapter tomorrow. Tomorrow we can do this chapter, macroeconomic policy objectives, and then what we'll do is this, that government market failure we'll do later. Okay, next week. Any questions, guys? Umama and Ashfaq, everyone else, are we good? Okay, guys. Next week we will do the last chapter, and let's see how things turn out. Thank you very much, guys. Have a good one. Bye bye.